Hey everybody, I'm Claire Hancock and I'm the editor-in-chief of Immersion Travel Magazine. Today is the first day of the Sustainable Travel Summit and our topic today is sustainable travel. What is it? What does it look like? And how do you build an itinerary around a sustainable travel model? In order to answer these questions, we've brought in experts from around the world, including experts from the GSTC, Sustainable Travel International, Asia Ecotourism, and many more. You can ask these experts questions in our chat window, or you can hop on Twitter and ask questions via the hashtag ITMSummit17. Today is sponsored by Urban Adventures, and they're taking over our Instagram account today at Immersion Travel Mag, and they're giving away free tours. Find out more at our website. One more thing I'd like to mention before we continue, our Kickstarter. Immersion Travel Magazine wants to be everything that your travel magazine should be. But we can't do that without member support. So please go to our Kickstarter, sign up to be a member, and thank you for your support. Enjoy! Next, we're going to learn how to volunteer like a pro. Volunteer travel has shaped communities and changed the travel sphere in the last 20 years. Now, Orit Strauss from Giving Away will explain how the industry has changed and what kinds of opportunities are now available. We're going to learn how to further navigate the changing world of volunteer travel. Again, please share any questions you have or comments in the chat window or tweet at us at hashtag ITMSummit17. Orit Strauss is the founder and CEO of Giving Away. A lawyer by profession, Orit practiced commercial law for over a decade. Founding the Giving Way Network was a natural continuation of Orit's interest in international volunteering. This interest stemmed from a year she spent volunteering on the Thai-Burma border. All right, well, thank you so much for joining us, Orit, and welcome. I'm so excited to have you here at the summit, and I'm really excited to learn more about volunteer travel and the kinds of experiences that Giving Way offers, especially, but also learning more about how travelers can make decisions while they're volunteering. so,
well, great. Thank you very much for having me here. It's very exciting to be here, and yeah, I'd love to talk about these issues.
Wonderful. Yay. Excellent. So my first question is, tell me about a memorable volunteer experience you've had that kind of changed the way that you thought about travel and volunteering.
Okay. Well, I volunteered almost 20 years ago I spent a year on the Thai-Burma border, and I volunteered as an English teacher. And I remember, it was many, many years ago, but I remember really this as if it was yesterday, the feeling of arriving at a refugee camp in deep, deep jungle, which is the border area between Burma and Thailand. And I arrived at a refugee camp, and I was the only foreigner at the camp. And I was supposed to teach English. Now, I was about 19 years old or something like that. And I didn't have much experience as a teacher, as an English teacher. And in the beginning, I found the classes teaching English very daunting. I would spend the whole day preparing, going over lesson plans and preparing for the afternoon class. And I was very nervous about it. And I have to say that the first few weeks were weren't simple, and I was very anxious about it, and I kept on thinking about how to make the classes interesting, how to make the lessons interesting, and all I had to assist me were a couple of lesson planning books that I brought with me. And what made a huge difference was suddenly it occurred to me to play a music song. I brought I don't know if it was cassettes, maybe. I don't even know if those still exist, or maybe it was a CD, but I had a tape of Tracy Chapman with me. I'll never forget this. And there was like a small music player, a radio cassette player, and I brought it to class, and I played a song, one of Tracy Chapman's songs, and it was like, it made the whole difference. The students, they were all grown up. They were over 20 years old, the students at the time, and they loved the music, and then it just spread like fire around the camp, because a lot of people at the time had guitars, and everybody started to play Tracy Chapman music, and
Cool.
it was just it was a game changer for me, because it really broke the ice. It was from classes being very, very daunting. It was suddenly an incredible experience, because I used to do a lot of music with with the students, and through songs and through learning lyrics of songs, I was able to build a whole lot of English around it. And I think that the lesson that I learned from that was that it was very much I discovered by chance, very much in sync with the nature, or the things that interested people at the time. And because there were a lot of guitars and people were very, very musical, it fit in very well. So I think that was something that I took with me for the remainder of the year that I spent teaching, was all the time to look for things that could resonate and could work with and could interest mostly the people that I was working with or teaching English.
Wonderful. Wow. Sounds, I mean, lots of lessons learned there, and wow,
Yeah,
that's great.
yeah, it was very interesting.
Nice. So, when someone's interested in volunteering, and they want to find a good organization that really fits, their strengths and their skill set, what are some things to consider when planning a trip like this?
Well, I think first of all, one should start with the obvious. I mean, in terms of what he or she is interested in. What are the causes that speak to you? I mean, are you interested in working with people, with local communities? Are you interested in volunteering with animal programs, the animal protection programs, or in environmental work? So I think the first the first thing is to identify what cause really interests you, and obviously, of course, the geography in which where you're interested in going. But I think that once you identify what you're interested in, at least it's very, very important to understand and to realize what your relevant skill sets are, and what you can bring to the table, so to say, as a volunteer, and how that fits with the needs of the organization that you will be volunteering with. And that's a very important issue, because I think really the most important thing as a volunteer, in order to have a successful trip, is to have the best match possible between what you can provide, your skill sets as a volunteer, and what the organization you're going to help with needs. And then I think that other things to bear in mind, I think doing your homework is extremely important. And that means learning as much as you can ahead of time about the organization, about the nonprofit that you will be working with, what the nonprofit works for, what are its causes, who are the people behind the nonprofit. I very strongly recommend being in touch with the organization beforehand, getting to know, getting clear understanding as much as possible of how your day will look like, what you will be doing, what your tasks will be, how your week will look like. Setting expectations on both ends, for you as a volunteer and for the organization, in terms of what to expect from you. And having said all that, I think that coming to as a volunteer to a foreign country, the most important thing is to be very, very flexible and open-minded, because you can plan and you can do homework, and you should set expectations, but things can very often change on the ground. And I think a volunteer has to be very, very adaptable and very open-minded in terms of things that change on the ground.
Wonderful. And it sounds like maybe that was a big lesson you learned during your first volunteer experiences. Every day it sounded like you were trying to adapt and figure out the best way to teach English to, this group. Right. If you could go back in time and give yourself some pointers or, some advice before you went on that trip, what would you say to yourself?
Well, I would pretty much say the same thing as I've said. I mean, trying as much as back then. It was much more difficult because, as I said, it was 20 years ago. So it wasn't. It's a bit embarrassing to talk about how long ago it was, but I mean, communication was much more difficult. I think they just started emails, or I mean, it's not Stone Age, but I think the internet just was much more. It was much more difficult to communicate ahead of time with the organization. I really arrived because I got to volunteer the way I did through personal acquaintances of people someone who knew someone who knew someone. And I just arrived there completely fresh off the boat, so to say. And I mean, at the time, I guess it was more difficult to know ahead of time what to expect. I just took a leap of faith, and I made my way through time with various local organizations, local nonprofits and local communities within the Burmese migrant community along the border that I got to know when I was there. And I think, again, really the flexibility and being open to changes was a very big part of it, because you would be teaching a group of students one day, and then suddenly there'd be changes, and the group would dismantle for reasons that are, unbeknownst to you, or entirely not within your hands, and you would have to adapt to that, or classes would be canceled or non-canceled, all different things that would really require a lot of flexibility. And I think that's still true today.
Yeah, I would agree with that, I'm sure. As things change and schedules change, and not every place is as stable as, some of the work environments that we might be used to in
Right.
more developed countries.
Absolutely.
So Giving Way, your website, really helps bridge the divide and connect, these organizations around the world with volunteers who are interested in traveling. Could you tell me a little bit more about how Giving Way got started, and what was the thought process behind creating this platform?
Of course. Well, actually, the reason for Giving Way, the reason why we established Giving Way was, in many respects, because I was, as I said, I volunteered almost 20 years ago, and over recent years, I always remained in touch over time with friends that I met on the border and people along the way. But in recent years, I started to get more involved again in this field, and I was actually amazed to discover a few things that had changed since the time that I volunteered, and what had happened today, what's happening today. And the first thing that really, really amazed me was to see how popular volunteering had become. I think many experts are referring to volunteer travel or volunteerism as one of the fastest growing sectors of international travel today. And I think in many respects that makes sense. It resonates with other wider trends in travel in general. So that's the one thing that I was amazed to see, how many people actually travel each year to volunteer. But the other thing that amazed me was to see how commercialized this industry had become, because as you know, many of these organizations in developing countries, they're very remote. Typically, they're not they don't have a very strong online presence. Mm-hmm. So a person wanting to volunteer, looking for an organization in Africa, for example, to volunteer with, would find it very difficult to reach the actual nonprofit, the actual school in Uganda, for example, to volunteer with. And I think that's part of the reason why in recent years it was very convenient for commercial companies, for travel companies, to basically dominate this market and take control of this market and serve as a middleman between volunteers and nonprofits. And besides the fact that these agents, so to say, usually charge thousands of dollars to place volunteers with nonprofits, I think the bigger issue, apart from the fact that it's become so expensive to volunteer, is that the impact is lost. And because when a placement is motivated by an agent who's motivated by financial considerations, then often there's not enough regard to what a volunteer can provide and what the local community on the other hand needs. And we felt at Giving Way that this is wrong, that this is not the way it should be, that in this day of age, a person should be able to find a local nonprofit organization, a grassroots organization that he or she is interested in supporting, and to be able to do it easily and directly, connect with the organization. Because essentially our belief is that when there's a direct dialogue between a volunteer and a nonprofit, the chances of maximizing the impact or maximizing the match between skills and needs is maximized. It's not 100%, but it's much, much more higher if the two sides speak directly and connect directly and exchange expectations. So that's why we established Giving Way. We're sort of the Airbnb of volunteer travel. We established what we call a marketplace, an online marketplace, which basically eliminates the need eliminates all agents and agent fees and allows anybody, volunteers, to connect with nonprofits directly and for free. That's basically what stands behind Giving Way.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yeah, that's something that I really enjoyed about Giving Way when I first started learning about it, was that I could actually reach out and talk to these different organizations and see, if my skill set was actually needed.
Right.
So, the last thing you want to do is show up and be like, oh, there's really nothing for me to do here.
Right, and we hear about that all the time. We hear about it from nonprofits, and we hear about it from volunteers. That a volunteer would arrive at a nonprofit and completely, absolutely without any connection to what the nonprofit needs, and everybody loses except for the agent who earns a lot of money. But the volunteers and the nonprofits, they really, it's a disservice to both sides of the market, and we hear this constantly all the time across the board from everyone, and we really do believe that connecting directly gives a better chance of matching skills and needs.
Wonderful. So you mentioned volunteer travel, or under some terms voluntourism, has risen over the last 10 years. Along with that has come with some organizations, some companies, some groups that are taking advantage of that and not necessarily doing it for good reasons. Several examples have had to do with orphanages around the world and whatnot. What are some questions that travelers could ask an organization just to make sure that they aren't going to be put into an unsavory situation or a sad situation like that?
Well, I think first of all, you have to be very clear as a volunteer if who you're talking with is an agent, is a middleman or a travel company or an agent who's a facilitator of your volunteering trip, or you're talking with the actual end organization, the actual nonprofit that you will be working with, volunteering with, and these are two different entities. So as a volunteer, you have to be very clear, first of all, because sometimes it's not very clear. Sometimes it's a bit confusing. So I think that first of all, you have to establish who you're engaging with. If you're engaging with a middleman or with an agent, not all agents are bad, so to say. Some agents do, they do a good job. And when you discuss your volunteering trip with an agent, you should try and get as much information as you can about the actual organization, the actual nonprofit you will be working with, the name, the website, the contact person, so that you can ask questions. So you can get in touch with you should try and ask the agent if you can get in touch with volunteers that have actually volunteered at the nonprofit that you will be going to. If you can talk to volunteers on the ground, if you can talk to staff from the nonprofit, So, I mean, that's if you're going through an agent. If you're going directly with a nonprofit like we're promoting in Giving Way, then again, you should ask many questions. You should ask the organization. You have to be very clear what the organization does, what its causes are, who are the people behind the organization. When it comes to children and childcare, you mentioned the orphanages. This is something that at Giving Way we've taken a very, very strong stance against. Volunteering at orphanages, we write about it extensively because there's a whole range of issues associated with volunteering in orphanages, which, I mean, I don't know if we have the time for it, but I mean, we strongly recommend people not to volunteer at orphanages. So, try to make sure that if someone will say, okay, you want to volunteer with kids, great. I'll send you to a children's home. Try and find out exactly what this children's home is. Is it an orphanage? Is it not? I think the most important thing is to ask questions as much as you can. If you're going with an agent, and an agent will always charge fees for these services, I would also ask I would request transparency about the fees, ask where the fees are going to, how much of this is going to the project, how much of this is going for, organizational fees and funding. So be very clear, and you need to feel comfortable about where your fees are going. Some of the actual nonprofits, like Giving Way, some of the nonprofits also charge fees from volunteers. Typically, I mean, if a nonprofit would provide a volunteer with accommodation, for example, or meals, then many of the nonprofits would ask a certain fee to cover those costs. So also just be completely understandably, by the way. But that's that. We at Giving Way, because we're an open platform. Each nonprofit basically is completely free to decide and manage its relationship with volunteers as it sees fit. I mean, some organizations don't charge any fees. Some nonprofits don't charge any fees from volunteers, while others do, and it's completely their prerogative to decide what and how much they charge. But if you're in touch with a nonprofit and which requires fees, one should be clear about where these fees are going. So I think these are the most important things that one should try to find out as much as possible ahead of time, because the more you know ahead of time, the better the experience probably will be.
Good. I know another issue that has arisen with volunteer travel is sometimes volunteers come in and they take jobs that the locals should be doing. So you mentioned teaching. Sometimes there isn't a teacher who knows English well enough to teach. But if someone can come in and teach those teachers English and give them, empower them to start teaching English in their own community and being a force for good that builds on itself, instead of coming in and having a volunteer every 2 weeks who's always teaching English and always taking over these these jobs that the locals could be having as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I think this is a really important point because in general, I think there are many misconceptions about volunteering abroad, about volunteerism, and I think one of the popular misconceptions is that volunteering for a long period of time is good and short period of time is bad. And I think that personally, I think that very, very few things in life are either black or white. I think most of us live in the gray area, and I think that this is one of the biggest misconceptions that I come across a lot. And your example is a great example, because I think that, I mean, if a person has a very long time, extensive period of time available to volunteer, then teaching English or being a frontal teacher, I think is great. But I think if you have even a very short period of time, even if you have a couple of days or something like that, there is a lot of value that a person can provide a nonprofit, especially for the example that you gave. Teach the Teacher is a great example of a very good usage of time and knowledge and skill sets that one can pass on to create a more sustainable work going forward. Or I'll give you an example. I mean, even if you have a day or two, but you are a retired accountant, all right, for example, and you have only 3 days to volunteer, but you can spend 3 afternoons with the staff of a local nonprofit and give a bookkeeping class or something like that. That has value. That has merit. Or as you said, train the trainer or teach teachers. I mean, these are very valuable things that could be provided even in a short period of time. And I think sometimes people are not aware. People think that, okay, if I have 6 months to volunteer, that's good. If I only have a few days, then I shouldn't bother because it won't create any value. And I think it's not about the length of time. It's about the actual value that you can provide and how relevant is it to the local community in the sense that it creates sustainable continuation after you leave.
Absolutely. Wonderful, wonderful. And you really see that. I mean, I see that a lot with conservation work as well. I mean, if you have one afternoon to volunteer, you can pick up a lot of trash on a beach or help, take out a lot of invasive species of weeds in one afternoon.
Definitely.
And yeah, I mean, there's so, and like you said, there's so many things out there that people might not even think of.
Exactly. Absolutely. And I think, and this comes back to having a direct dialogue with the organization, because once you speak to the actual nonprofit and you understand what the nonprofit needs, what their needs are, not what you think is needed or what you think is good, but what their actual needs are, then there's so many things that people can do that you don't even realize that you can do until you really understand that. I'll give you an example. Someone I know well traveled. There was a group of donors that traveled to South Africa to a township and visited a very underprivileged school. Okay, a group of big donors, and they come to the school. And they saw that the kids that there were barely any chairs and tables, and they thought that what they should do, what the best thing for the school would be, was to donate money or buy chairs and tables, and that's what they thought would be the most beneficial for the school. But then when they continued on and continued discussing with the headmaster of the school what was the situation, and said, okay, what we think is needed is to buy chairs and tables. The headmaster told them that actually what they would really need is there was a choir contest in the province, and the kids really wanted to participate in the contest. And they didn't have uniforms. They didn't have a proper uniforms to participate, and they didn't want to go because of that. And the headmaster said, if you want to really help us, what we would really like is uniforms so that the kids can participate in this contest. And I think, and that's what the donors did. And I think this is an incredible example of how when you understand and when you speak to the actual people on the ground. And the dialogue comes, and the assistance comes from what the needs on the ground are. Then we would be surprised, about what actually is needed by nonprofits.
Yeah, that's so many times I've heard about situations where listening was the most important thing you could do. It's the most beneficial thing you could do for community, instead of going in and saying, "Oh, I know how to fix this." Go in and talk to them. Say, what do you need? How can I help?
Exactly. I mean, that's what we're trying to do at Giving Way. We're trying to shift the focus shift the paradigm from what us as volunteers think is needed, and certainly what placement agents think is needed, over to what the nonprofits need. And Giving Way is the voice for this. Each nonprofit has its own profile, establishes, and each nonprofit writes who it is, what it needs, what are the skill sets that it requires, and each organization manages its volunteers as it sees fit according to what the organization needs. And I think this is something that we all need to remember as volunteers, not to come into local community with our conceptions of what is needed, but to listen to what the community needs.
I wonder if you could share an example of one of the, or I mean, you have so many organizations that are part of Giving Way now, but could you share an example of one?
Wow, that's we have hundreds of organizations from about 80 countries around the world. So I mean, it's a little bit difficult to pick between them. But I mean, because really there's a very big variety. I mean, there are organizations that engage in local community development. There are a lot of schools. There are organizations that deal with environmental issues, environmental protection, nonprofits that deal with animal shelters, and so it's difficult to
Okay. Yeah, I mean, let's say I'm interested in conservation and I'm heading to the Middle East. You know, I'm interested in maybe seeing, you know, even from Morocco to Egypt to Israel. You know, I'm interested in kind of being in that area. Are there conservation programs or projects in that area?
Well, actually, in Israel, there is an archaeological project with the Archaeological Society in Israel, where there's a lot of use for volunteers in various excavations. I mean, that's one example that comes to mind.
Sounds exciting.
Sorry?
And that sounds exciting.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of archaeology here in this area, that's for sure. That's an example that comes to mind. More conservation work in the Middle East. I would have to check.
Okay. No, yeah, I was kind of curious to learn a little bit more. So I'm interested to see what the future is looking like for Giving Way. I mean, you mentioned you have hundreds of organizations working with you. What are the plans for next steps?
Well, we humbly want to become. We want to be really the new. We want to be the leading platform in terms of changing the way people actually go and volunteer abroad. Because as I said, the way things are done now is that people travel to volunteer through agents and pay a lot of money on the way to do mostly unimpactful work. And we're aiming to change this. We really want to create a situation where if you're a nonprofit, doesn't matter how remote you are, it doesn't matter if you don't have an internet site or you're completely remote. We want to be able to be a platform for you to have a fair chance to find volunteers and to be found by volunteers, to have an equal chance and to level the playing field so that everybody, basically anyone, can find the volunteering opportunity or the volunteering cause and the organizations that suits his or her skill sets and interests, and to change the way people volunteer abroad, so that it's done in an impactful way, in a manner that respects local communities and first and foremost takes into consideration what local communities need. This is what we're aiming for. So yeah, now we have a good few hundred. We're hoping to have many thousands of nonprofits, so that really and anybody seeking volunteers can, and donations, by the way, also will be able to do that through Giving Way.
Wonderful. It sounds like an ambitious road ahead, but it sounds like you're also well on your way, and it's a wonderful website. And I'm so excited that we could share it today and share some of your experiences with volunteer travel and also your advice. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much.